Hey everyone, my name's Keenan. Welcome to the September 9th, 2021 community call at 1500 UTC. Today we'll be chatting about DXdAo's massive Arbitrum deployment, including DX Vote, Swapper Token, and ending on a chat about farming. But before we get into the Arbitrum discussion, though, we'd like to start with an update of DX Ventures and its various initiatives, including the Opolis and HATS projects. I guess, Sky, are you around to take that away?
Yeah, just to give a brief update. So DX Ventures' initial or first ever investment grant was actually into Opolis. Opolis has been growing. DXdao, as part of being a member of Opolis, was due to receive like work token, which is the governance token of the system. Up till now, the Opolis system really was deployed and was being mainly used on Polygon, and DXdao doesn't currently have a base on Polygon. So there was some back and forth about where and how DXdao should receive its work tokens. And so currently, in the last couple of weeks, DXdao received its first tranche of work tokens into its mainnet treasury, and there is a post up on the forum about a few different options that DXdao has to do with the work tokens. There could be liquidity pools on Swapper, and this could ideally be on mainnet or Arbitrum. There's also a method to stake work token into the Opolis ecosystem, which gives you a share of work rewards each epoch that happens. In that case, there would likely maybe be a delegated or a DXdao dev multi-sig that could stake on behalf of DXdao with all or some amount of the work tokens. Typically in the Opolis system, a bunch of people are getting streamed work token on actual Polygon using Superfluid, but in DXDAO's scenario where we aren't able to receive the Superfluid tokens, we'll likely get additional work tokens on like a quarterly basis. So DXdAO will continue to be as a key member of the Opolis system, will continue to like receive work tokens over time. And so thinking about what we want to do with those work tokens, participate in governance, stake, use them in liquidity pools. We should make that decision. And then the most immediate topic with DX Ventures is related to HATS. And HATS, there's two different initiatives happening with DXdAO. So HATS is a kind of a bug bounty, a decentralized bug bounty protocol that has vaults that incentivize white hat hackers to like report problems to your project and receive reward. And so DXdAO is a heavy participant and early participant in this system, which is alongside a few others. But in addition to that, DXdAO through DX Ventures has signaled that it wants to lean into investing or having a heavier stake in the HATS protocol and ecosystem. And so there is a live proposal that I think just has been past boosting that can be voted on now on mainnet, made by the HATS team to ask for $100,000 grant investment in exchange for additional HATS tokens, so that DXdAO can become a key stakeholder in the HATS ecosystem. And so, that's live on mainnet. So go ahead and vote. Even gas is expensive, but it would be great to get some signal there, or not signal, but actual like a proposal to actually make the investment. So if there's any questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, that's an update.
Thanks, Guy. Just for context for anyone here that might not know, at the end of every kind of segment, we leave the door open for open questions. Anyone's welcome to unmute, step up, and ask anything. People do leave some questions with me, though, so I can kick that off here. This one was left with me yesterday. Sky, There was a sheet that included a bunch of projects DX Ventures was interested in. Is there an update on any of those projects? I think that's referring to ETHVC. We did a presentation 2 community calls ago.
Yeah, so DX Ventures is, which is really like DXdao and its community, has been figuring out its identity, and like investments just for like investment's sake are less interesting to DXdao community, it seems, and projects that are really, this ties, this is in line with the initial the initial points when DX Ventures was founded, but it's developed over time, where really a project that DXdao can use is building something that DAOs need, is where DX Ventures would really prefer to lean into, and that shows with like this investment in hats, where we're a big early user, but we also want to be a big stakeholder. And so there's a handful of projects there's a lot of projects that DXdao and DX Ventures have looked at over the last couple months, and yeah, there's a list where it's being tracked and things. There's a couple projects coming out of there still that we're talking to, that if it makes sense and there is an opportunity, there'll be like a specific forum post about that. And so those are always ongoing, and the group in general is always open to like people bringing new ideas and new projects and present those to DXdao as additional opportunities. So there is always an ongoing list, and the door is always open, but fitting the criteria of like really being something that DXdao could use and other DAOs could use, and it makes sense, is where I think we would lean into, basically.
Thanks. We have a comment from Mango here. Atlantis World seems promising. It'd be cool to get in on that. Do we have any updates on any potential stance there?
Yeah, Atlantis World is a unique project. It's it's the metaverse. It's trying to combine the DeFi metaverse. There are a handful of already DeFi projects that have given some grants to be a part of Atlantis World from the start. DXdao is considering this. I think maybe there'll be like a more detailed post soon, but hearing what the community thinks about like an investment or a grant into like an early metaverse opportunity would be great to get from the community. Obviously the metaverse is huge, and there's lots of different worlds and ecosystems out there. So like there's also the debate of like deciding which one to lean into, and so I think there should be more discussion around Atlantis World. But if people are excited about it, yeah, that's really good to hear, and come join the conversation.
Cool. And I got one more here left with me. Maybe it was partially addressed earlier, but just for programming here. They ask, I heard work was only on Polygon. Will DXdao finally be deploying to Polygon?
Good question. So DXdao does not have a plan to have like a rep DXdao base on Polygon. Obviously, Arbitrum is the focus right now, but DXdao does now have a like squad multi-sig that has the ability to do stuff on Polygon. So I think in some capacity for smaller amounts of value and things, I think DXdao could do things on Polygon. And one example would be potentially staking the work token into the Opolis system, which is running on Polygon. So that is at least an option. But in terms of like a governance base on Polygon, there's no plan for that as of now.
Awesome. Thanks, Sky. Any other questions for DX Ventures here? Otherwise, we'll be moving on. Great, guys. Let's move on to the Arbitrum deployment updates. I think John hopefully is around. Was planning to give a comprehensive update on our deployment, what happened, and how we're going to move forward with it.
Yep. Hi, all. Like Keenan said, I'd like to cover the background, why we were focused on Arbitrum, why we're doing DXvote, cover what the original plan was, and then talk about the fatal flaw in the configuration, which caused the issues that we now have and require redeployment, and then talk about what has been going on to prepare for redeployment and what the new plan is now going forward. And then I think from there, of course, we can take questions, but we would be going into the farming details after that. And I think either Zet or Keenan will cover that part. But to jump in here, so we've been tracking as a community the development of layer twos, and in particular the optimistic rollups since last year. And the two that seem to be most prominent are Optimism and Arbitrum. And pretty early on, the focus turned to Arbitrum for a couple of reasons. And to talk about like why we're focused on the optimistic rollups, DXdao has an emphasis on decentralization, and therefore I think the community cares very deeply about the security of any chains being tied to Ethereum. And so layer twos, I think the definition that I prefer and I think we most widely use in the DXdao community is chains that inherit security properties from layer one, from the main chain. And I think that definition makes the most sense because you have that kind of visual conceptual picture of layer twos actually being built on top of layer ones and like inheriting this stability and security from that layer one versus a side chain which has its own security. So when you think of like XDAI, which DXdao is deployed on, that's a side chain. We like it because it helped us prepare for layer twos. It's a great environment to do things at a low cost, but it comes with the understanding that it does not have the same decentralization or inherent security from Ethereum. And Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, those are all side chains, right? And so looking specifically at layer two, so why are we excited about the optimistic rollups? There are other layer twos that have already been deployed. Loopring is probably one of the ones that the community here is most familiar with. They use zero knowledge technology to do the rollup that they have. But the functionality is fairly limited. It's essentially just an exchange. And what the DXdao community and with DXdao's suite of products is most interested in is the ability to deploy our own products, right? And what that kind of requires is, most practically the EVM compatible chain or like more generally like a generalized layer two solution. And there's a few teams working on that. I think most notably, you have the optimistic rollups like Optimism and Arbitrum, and then you also have the ZK rollups like ZK Sync from Matter Labs. The kind of general, I think, view on this is that the optimistic rollups are coming out first, and here we are. They are actually live, although with admin control. And then why did we choose Arbitrum over Optimism? I think there are two reasons. One was from talking to other community members and folks that had dealt with both teams. We had the impression that Arbitrum was actually a bit further along. That wasn't always clear from what was being talked about with media releases and stuff. Optimism came out pretty hot with some of their marketing, but even through that, we were pretty confident in the idea that Arbitrum was ahead, and I think that is actually borne out to be true. While technically Optimism did open up to end users earlier than Arbitrum and has more capital on their chain right now, Arbitrum is actually open for any projects to deploy on today, right? And so Optimism, there's still kind of a queue of projects onboarding. Now that's not to say like Arbitrum does still maintain admin control, as does Optimism, and they are gating the bridge, so the tokens have to get whitelisted for it. So it's not completely open, but if you're a project and you want to deploy that, that is available to you today on Arbitrum, and it's not on Optimism. And I think that makes a world of difference, and we'll see this play out over the next weeks and months in terms of the competitive advantage for Arbitrum. And then the other big reason, and this sort of ties into the Arbitrum approach, is that from pretty early on, like January, February, we had great contact with the Arbitrum team. We were getting great support from them, and they were helping us develop on their test nets, whereas Optimism was pretty constrained in terms of who they were helping. And I mean, that's not to criticize them or their approach. That was their choice, and they have limited resources too, of course, but it was less accessible to DXdao. So I think that, pretty much sealed the deal there, right? We had the opening with Arbitrum. We felt like they were ahead, and so the strategy was set to focus on Arbitrum deployment. Now, in terms of DXvote, why are we even working on DXvote? Why is that being deployed to Arbitrum? So, as those familiar with DXdao know, it's built on DAOstack. DAOstack's framework. Their smart contracts is the Alchemy front end. That's where DXdao was launched. It still operates on those platforms today on mainnet and XDAI. However, the DAOstack team has pivoted and is no longer focusing or developing either of those platforms. And of course, these platforms are quite important for DXdao and its future. So that is the reason why we are working on DXvote. There are actually instances of that you can access the mainnet and XDAI deployments of DXdao, but Arbitrum is the first time that DXvote is being deployed from the smart contract level, and is like the only base, or the only front end that we're actually using on Arbitrum. So this is the first time basically that DXvote is being relied upon in production. And to cover the DXvote, it's based on the DAOstack contracts with some additions, some new schemes, the ability to do DXD staking instead of the DAOstack token, which is Gen. So those are exciting. And then on the front end is completely open source and is new and does not rely on the subgraph, which has often given us difficulties. And with the level of funds and operations that DXdao have, the uptime and reliability of the governance interface is of utmost importance. So those are the motivating factors there. And so the plan was, has been to deploy DXvote to Arbitrum into production and to manage the swapper deployment on Arbitrum. And so with the excitement on Arbitrum, the plan was and has been executed to launch the swapper token on Arbitrum, timing that launch with Arbitrums, and because of the perceived momentum that we think could be gained there around the first kind of generalized open layer 2 solution to be launched on Ethereum, we felt that the timing was good to go out with the swapper token. And so the original plan, and there's a very detailed post on DAO Talk that outlines all the technical procedure to enable the community to carry it out, was to deploy swapper DXvote and the swapper token to Arbitrum, and it required 3 proposal steps. And a thing to note here is that at that time, this was set up before the gates were open to anyone on Arbitrum, and development was restricted to a whitelist. So that influenced this plan. And so the first step was for a community member to deploy the swapper token and to make a proposal on Alchemy or DXvote on mainnet to inform the community that the token, hypothetical token, have been deployed and what the deployer address was. The dev team then let the Arbitrum team know the deployer address so that it could be whitelisted. The next step was for the DXvote deployment to go out by the DXdao team, and that a proposal to be made, kind of identifying what the addresses are there to, quote, anoint the base on Arbitrum. And then the final step was for the same community member who deployed the token to deploy, now that they have been whitelisted, to deploy all the swapper contracts onto Arbitrum and build and deploy the latest release of the front end and make a proposal on DXDAO's governance to update the content hash on the ENS domain, so swapper.eth. So when that proposal passed, swapper.eth was updated and everybody could go and claim their airdrop and such and use Swapper on Arbitrum 1. And that timing was such that when Arbitrum went live, that was available. So that all executed very well and was great. And the airdrop, I'd say, is going quite well. There's been over 900 claims. I think 700 something addresses still hold Swapper. There's like almost 70 providing liquidity on the Swapper ETH pair on Arbitrum. I'd say like pretty happy with the price. So that's very subjective. I think, overall, that part has gone well. But now, so on to the point where we had a problem. So Swapper itself is working great on Arbitrum, but there is a need for it to be governed, right? So, and feel free to interrupt me. I know I'm kind of on a long, so I see there's like comments that I'm not really paying attention to, and so Keenan, feel free to interrupt me. But
so we could just take a quick question break. We have a couple questions here.
Yeah.
Just for programming. Turf Noob asks, is it a challenge for us to also go to optimism related to obviously the Arbitrum deployment?
Yeah, so there is overhead to all of this, right? Like setting up a base on a new chain requires development work, right? It requires attention from people doing governance, right? So I do think that is a limiting factor, right? We can't just press a button and like deploy to all chains. I don't think that's practical. Could we go to optimism? Yes. Like if there is will and desire to do that, we could.
Cool. I guess the only other question was what should I do when Swapper migration? But we can cover that in a little bit. Nathan already.
Yeah, let me get into that. So, yeah, I'll get into that in a second.
Cool.
Anything else?
I think those are the two main ones here.
Okay, great. So the issue. So we need DX vote the base to govern the Swapper deployment. It sets the fees. It controls what happens to the fees, right? Like that power the plan is to hand that over to the Swapper guild. So the Swapper token holders then have all that control over the base, the fees, and other aspects of the front end and launching it, right? So governance is really key. And even though DX vote had was successfully deployed, the first proposals were intended to set the permissions up so that farming campaigns could be launched. And this was was Wednesday last week, although it feels like a longer time ago at this point. That proposal succeeded, it executed, but it did not actually set the permissions. And upon inspection, this error was uncovered, and the error was kind of due to a misunderstanding of one of these parameters in the DAO stack system that DX vote is based on. That parameter is called max seconds to execute, and it's basically a time limit from which to execute that you have to on executing a proposal. And the understanding that the dev team and the folks testing it had was that this max seconds to execute was counting from the actual like passing of the proposal. But upon further inspection, and this actually kind of makes sense just due to how blockchains work, it is actually counting from the submission of the proposal. And because the boosted proposals with the boosting period took at least a day and a half on the fastest scheme on DXvote, this meant that none of the schemes that we have on Arbitrum could actually pass any proposals via the boosting process. And those that are familiar know that that's pretty critical for passing proposals with DXdao. So the next question was, well, can we fix this with an absolute majority vote? We don't often get those done, but it has happened on XDAI with some frequency and on occasion on mainnet. However, when we inspected like the feasibility of doing that, there was, I don't know if you'd really say this is an error, but there was a way that a discrepancy in how the rep distribution was cloned onto Arbitrum compared to XDAI, where we have had success on absolute majority votes. So all the address, it came from cloning mainnet. addresses were included. The smart contract addresses are where there's an issue because your smart contract address can't be the same across different chains. So it requires some mapping, the same mapping that had been carried out for rep holders with DXdao was used on Arbitrum, but the difference was that smart contracts that did not map, they had been excluded on DXdao, but they were included on Arbitrum. And since smart contracts can't be used, that rep essentially is useless on Arbitrum. That could have been fixed, but it limited the ability to pass absolute majority, and basically when we assessed it, it seemed essentially impossible. And so that brought us to the plan of redeploying. And so redeploying, it will entail redeploying the governance base, the swapper contracts themselves, and the swapper token. Now, while existing swapper token in theory could have been used into the future, there is a decent chunk of the supply that is locked in this dead base. And so the decision was made to kind of go ahead with redeployment of the token itself. And so when we were looking at how to do that, really the only option was to convert it using a converter 1-to-1. It was explored to the idea of redeploying a new claimer was explored, but you run into issues of people being able to double claim or not knowing who's like claimed and traded and stuff. So there's a converter. And so once the redeployment is done, the process as outlined in, I think the latest update on Medium will be that people who have already claimed or who haven't claimed go to swapper.eth, and there'll be a prompt in a button in the upper right-hand corner to either claim first or just convert if you already done that step. And important to note that because Swapper itself is being redeployed, any liquidity on the old version is going to have to be migrated to the new one to be visible in swapper.eth on the dApp itself. And so I could go on the little. I could also touch on where we are in that and what the plan is, but I can pause now for questions. Because is that just posted the timeline?
Yes, to say maybe instead of questions, we could just kind of cover this timeline in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so we've been very busy, people working through the weekends and a lot of people jumping in a real valiant effort to test and prepare the redeployment. And I'd say we're getting very close to the point of those releases being ready. We've done a lot more testing than we had previously done, covering a lot of the cases, including farming proposals and other edge cases. And so I'd say in the next couple of days, hopefully we'll be ready, and it'll involve a deployment of, we don't have the whitelisting issue anymore, so there's no need to for the token to go first, but it'll involve a deployment of DXvote and the new swapper contracts with the converter. And the key thing to watch will be when a proposal is made to update the dApp itself at swapper.eth. So that build would point to the new version, and when that passes, and that timeline typically takes 4 days to pass, we'd be off to the races with the new deployments. There are some extra precautions. We're trying to take some more baby steps to make sure that we don't, get into a similar situation with the governance base. When we first deploy the base, the idea is to have the rep distribution concentrated at the very beginning with a few holders. They'll have all the same addresses with the same rep, but extra for a handful, essentially similar to how there's a dev multi-sig. That would be basically in control at the very beginning to make sure that the everything is stabilized and that the parameters are working. Yeah, so like I said, there's basically some extra precautions in the deployment process to take it slow and leave control basically within a small group of people until it's stabilized, and then handed back over to the full deployment. Basically some training wheels for the first couple of days, but hopefully everything is set before that first proposal even is set to pass, and so we'll be in the same spot as we should have been last week, and then farming can commence. To Mango's question, is it not possible to get absolute majority for the swapper token conversion proposal? So for the update to the DApp rather than taking 4 days, it is possible, and we can push for it. That would accelerate the timeline. We can encourage folks to vote on mainnet. It's definitely possible. It has been a long time since a proposal has passed by absolute majority on mainnet, though, so I wouldn't necessarily count on it. And sort of maybe part of the issue there is to set up the farming. Those are proposals themselves on Arbitrum, and you need to set a start date to the farming campaign. And it's kind of bad if you get the start date to be before the proposal passes. So there's a bit of a necessity there, I think, to be conservative on those farming proposals anyways, which will take a day and a half with the swapper wallet scheme on Arbitrum. In other words, I don't think we'd gain a whole lot by passing an absolute majority proposal or passing the swapper.eth update with absolute majority.
I just want to note that this is like, I don't know, this is like one of the, sort of, I don't want to say issues because that might be like a bit too negative, but, being completely and fully on chain and doing things in a decentralized way from the start. So, sometimes you'd have bugs, and yeah, we can sort of remedy that with like more testing and trying things beforehand. But, these things will happen. We'd like to avoid them, but, sometimes it's inevitable. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is crypto, so I guess we're familiar with issues coming up. I think we did take a very aggressive and ambitious, we did set a very ambitious plan here. And like I tried to explain that kind of at the beginning, why that was the case. I mean, it was really trying to push to be timed with the launch of Arbitrum was the main motivation there. And yeah, I think there are lessons for sure to be learned. Like we were spread a bit too thin, did not do enough testing, although the max seconds thing may have been actually pretty tricky to catch at the end of the day. And some of this is just coming with the territory of kind of taking control of our own destiny with the governance platform, whereas we have previously been relying on it, an external team to run the platform. One of the things we've been talking about amongst the developers at DXdao is focusing on a smaller number of priorities and being spread less thin. And so that was already sort of in motion, is happening. And I think this kind of experience with the deployment here reinforces the idea that we need to do that, right? That there needs to be more of a focus, and we need to have a deeper bench on the things that we're actually doing and deploying and not be so spread thin. Of course, we would have loved to scale the development team, but recruiting has been difficult, and that's something we'll continue to work on until we do scale up the development capabilities.
Cool. Maybe a good segue. I have a bunch of questions left with me surrounding Arbitrum and Swapper. Obviously, John's been speaking for a while, so myself as well as anyone else that's able to step in that is relevant would be greatly appreciated. But I guess the first question here is, will DX Vote be used outside of Arbitrum for DXdao? Which is ironically probably a good one for you, John.
And I was taking a nap. Can you repeat the question?
That's not true, by the way, in the comments. Will DX Vote be used outside of Arbitrum for DXdao?
Yes, that's the goal. The goal is for DXdao to be the governance platform for DXdao. And so, like we mentioned, it is based on the DAO stack contracts. And so using it on mainnet at the smart contract level doesn't actually require a change of the avatar address. It would just require updating of the schemes and how those work. Of course, anything like that controls the way governance works on mainnet is a very serious thing, considering the size of the treasury and the other assets that it holds, and that it's kind of at the center of all DXdao governance. And so we'll definitely be taking our time with that. And part of the role that the Arbitrum deployment serves is as like a proving grounds for DXvote, right? To show that we are truly ready to move on to mainnet with it. I think the next step would be either another chain deployment on, if maybe Optimism or something, or using it on XDAI instead of the current XDAI contracts in Alchemy. It is already being used in parallel as from the front end. Like the front end itself is being used in parallel on XDAI and mainnet, and is actually helping quite a bit because, like we said, when there's issues with the subgraph, which is really all too common, it's there to be available and much more reliable from that perspective.
Cool. And actually, just only one other directly related to the deployment question is, and which you've already addressed anyhow, but just for consistency, were any DXdao funds lost or at risk because of the problems?
Thankfully, no funds were lost. There were no funds impacted. We were kind of maybe scarily close to funds being lost since we lost the base, but there were no funds on the base yet. There were plans to put funds there, but that was going to come after the other proposals. So thankfully, no funds were lost other than the funds required to kind of pay contributors to fix the issues and handle that kind of stuff.
Cool. And then moving on to more swapper focused questions, maybe going to call on a couple people here. When will DXstats show Arbitrum? Maybe a good one for Federico if you're around, or I can step in for you.
Yeah, so we're currently working on that. And I think we're really close. We might see a release or a proposal for a release going up by the end of this week. There were plans to work on it sooner, but unfortunately this thing happened, so priorities kind of shifted a little bit, but should be up the proposal by the end of the week.
Awesome. And just some additional context to that. Once the proposal goes live, it'll obviously need to pass to point the DXstats domain to the ENS hash of the updated release. So expected within a week or so is basically the timeline, if I'm understanding correctly. I have a question from Ross here. Does the swapper token work similarly to the new DXD model where it is used in conjunction with rep, or is it a separate model? Maybe I can try to explain a little bit here. Swapper is going to utilize the ERC20 guild contract, so it'll be entirely token-based voting by the community. And not have any affliction with the current rep model that DXdao is using, nor the governance 2.0 model that will be a mix of token-based voting and rep-based voting. Maybe, John, anything I missed there?
I think you got that.
Awesome. One more question left with me. If I haven't claimed swapper, should I wait? John, I think you addressed this as well. But to be super clear, regardless of when you claim, you'll still need to do the transition to the new swapper token. So you can claim today, you can claim when the migration is actually open. It doesn't matter. You'll have to do the migration. And luckily, the swapper UI will point directly to that and guide you through the process. So you can do it today. You can do it, yesterday, tomorrow. It doesn't really matter. It just will have to be done when the migration is live.
Yeah, no need to wait on the swapper claim itself, but to be clear, if you wanted to provide liquidity, you may want to wait on that because of the requirement to migrate it later will cost extra gas. That's sort of up to you. I'd probably say it makes more sense to wait. What you definitely want to not do now is start a DIY farming campaign on the current interface, because when that's updated, you wouldn't be able to see it anymore. So you don't want to be locking any rewards into a DIY farming. Not that that's going to be a common use case, but there was somebody that we caught asking questions about this in the Telegram, actually planning to do it. So I was glad we were able to inform them of what was happening and prevent them from kind of locking up their rewards in a platform that wasn't going to be visible.
Cool. One more left with me here. what pairs will DXdao be supplying liquidity to on Arbitrum? Actually might be a good opportunity to talk about DXDAO's liquidity provision to Arbitrum. Chris, if you're around and have a window, maybe I can step in for you if you are busy in the room.
Yeah, just on the liquidity provisioning on Arbitrum. So kind of another piece in the puzzle. So in June, DXdao passed as part of a Arbitrum launch plan initially signaled support to commit $2.25 million of capital in the Arbitrum base, the DXdao base on Arbitrum 1, and some of that to be used for swapper liquidity, and the $250,000 to be used for general operating expenses. So we've been talking about how to execute on that in the last couple of weeks, and there's been some discussions on that. So there's actually one proposal that is supposed to pass, I think, today. Actually, this is a test proposal, though, because one of the key challenges in getting liquidity into Swapper and Arbitrum is getting the funds into Arbitrum, because bridges are very new, and typically the way the DXdao has gotten funds to XDAI has been through a multi-sig that exists on both mainnet and XDAI. But of course, with Arbitrum just launching, some of that infrastructure isn't there, so there's actually not a Gnosis safe. Gnosis safe is not compatible on Arbitrum 1 right now, so we're in the process of trying to test that. So that's kind of on figuring out how to get the funds actually over there, and we've ended up setting up actually a new multi-sig that we hope can be across different chains. There's a proposal to test that there. There's actually another proposal to send funds on. This one would be much larger amount that is actually set to fail in the next day or so. And that's partly because, as John was mentioning earlier, when we were going with the Arbitrum 1 launch plan, we were being very aggressive and ambitious in planning for kind of all the flows to kind of come at once. But since things have kind of slowed down a little bit and Arbitrum is still kind of getting things settled up, the funds just aren't really ready to be there yet. And as I said, there's some problems with the Gnosis safe there. So we're having to really test that to make sure it'll go through there. So presumably we'll have another proposal that will send the remaining the $2.25 million to Arbitrum 1 base when there's some when we've finished testing for the bridging process. In terms of what those assets are, so DXdao has been provisioning liquidity on Swapper on XDAI and mainnet across a couple of different pairs. For this one, we were trying to be a little bit more strategic on what pairs to add liquidity on dependent on what assets are on Arbitrum 1, what tokens are there. So typically we're going after the ETH stablecoins, but in this proposal or the discussions of the community, there was a little bit more flexibility to determine what stablecoins to going after. So again, there's some problems with Arbitrum 1 right now in terms of being fully compatible, because DAI, which the original proposal had indicated we should be providing liquidity on, DAI is not yet accessible on Arbitrum 1. In terms of moving forward, there will presumably be another proposal that has a bit more specifics on what the pairs that DXdao will be providing liquidity on, but it will be kind of the primary ones in terms of ETH stablecoin pairs.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Any other final questions here for the larger Arbitrum and Swapper deployment to Arbitrum? Cool. We'll leave that door open. We do have open questions at the end, so any follow-up questions can be made there. We will move on to a quick call of attention to farming. Obviously, the big thing on everyone's mind. A lot of the actual plan regarding farming was talked about already, but I'd like to cover specifically the pairs and what the new updated plan will be, considering that. So first of all, the facts. If you've seen the Swapper token announcement, there was an announced, in parentheses, announced farming campaign, which accounted for a handful of tokens on Arbitrum. Obviously, alongside this deployment issue we've been having, we realized that there was a handful of those tokens that are actually not available day one on Arbitrum, and or working behind closed doors for various reasons. So we can't do DAI, as Chris mentioned. We're unable to do Aave, Moon, or Perp on day one. Obviously, we'd still love to have these communities. They're our targeted communities, so we're not going to move those allocations to other communities. But we do have a strategy to ramp up in the place of them. The first thing we did was obviously we had 2 ETH pools, USDC ETH and DAI ETH. We translated the DAI allocation to USDC in DAI's absence, which we are expecting to move back gradually once DAI is available on Arbitrum. We also initially didn't have a stablecoin allocation. This was because there was a handful of stable-focused projects that were looking like they were to launch day one on Arbitrum. As you may or may not know, this doesn't appear to be the case. Uniswap doesn't appear to have the liquidity they expected. Trident isn't launched, for example. So we've decided that some of the smaller allocation that we were unable to use day one will allocate temporarily to a stable pool between USDC and USDT, which are both available on Arbitrum day one. And we'll be ramping that down over the next couple of epochs as the other tokens come online, which gives a good opportunity to move USDT directly in Swapper to USDC. We also move the allocations around very slightly for the ecosystem tokens, and have done so in such a way that there's 10% remaining unallocated Swapper token in the first epoch. Instead of, for example, letting this go to waste, it'll first and foremost go directly to the Swapper treasury when available, but we can also consider utilizing it in several different ways, such as community incentives and additional farming incentives. Obviously, this is all up for vote and nothing that we can determine, but that unallocated amount will be directly back in the hands of the Swapper Guild. I think now's a good opportunity to share a graphic of this. And to be super clear, this is all not formal. There will be a farming announcement that will have formalized amounts, dates, everything that you can look forward to in the next couple of days. Zet earlier shared a farming timeline. Obviously waiting on the proposal to update the ENS before that is possible. But this is a good snapshot of what we are expecting, which I've just put in the chat. And as additional context, of course, we set up these kind of initial farms, but the entire bottom line is that DXdao governance will have the final say. So what you see here may change even drastically by the time the farming is announced. I can't make any promises, but this is our current expectation and the Swapper squad of what it will look like. Cool. I think that's a main recap. I do have some questions. Obviously, anyone's welcome to ask questions as usual. First question left with me is why no stable allocation? And to be clear, covered that just a bit earlier. But we expect other competitive stable dApps to kind of rule the stable space, which is why we didn't originally have stables. But like I mentioned, an initial allocation of stables kind of moving down as those protocols come online, I think is a smart thing for us. Another question here with me is simply when farming. And obviously, again, we've kind of covered this. You can look forward to an announcement of when farming will be specifically in the next couple of days. It'll be very dependent on our proposals and when our testing has completed. But you can safely assume from the timeline, if, for example, the proposal were to be submitted tomorrow, that farming would start at a maximum of 6 days. Obviously, no promises there as well. We'll be waiting on that proposal submission and farming announcement to have any solidified days. And one last question I had with me, are any other communities going to be added? This is a good question. I think the reason that we have done it in such a way that we left an unallocated amount is introducing communities to an allocation and then promptly removing them when something better comes along is not very good from an optics standpoint. Introducing rewards to a community temporarily and taking them away is generally not something that we want to do. We are considering that, though, for this first allocation. Yeah, I think that's everything left with me. Any other questions on farming? I see Gavin typing. And no longer typing. Cool. We'll move on to open questions. Obviously, anything we've talked about today or any general questions, I actually have one left with me. So anyone that's in this call right now, any questions, leave them in the chat or hop on the call. Mic is open. But we'll start right away with the one left with me. Does DXdao have a hedge against Ethereum, ADA, or Sol, for example? Very, very broad stroke question. Maybe John, we can address.
I think it's a pretty simple answer, actually, and that's no.
Yeah. Well, the answer is obviously no, but I think addressing.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of Ethereum, the platform, yeah, there isn't like currently really a hedge or any move to deploy on some of the potentially competitive chains there. But we are getting practice on deploying to other chains like DXdao, right? So, I mean, I guess you could view DXdao as a bit of a hedge. However, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really a serious effort or even like thinking about hedging against Ethereum itself. But given the experience that we're gaining deploying to other chains, I think we are preparing and getting prepared to be able to deploy to other chains if it seemed necessary or important strategically. In terms of ETH, the asset, yeah, very much so. We are hedging. Like there's the whole treasury diversification effort. So, but yeah, but the core base is on Ethereum, and there hasn't been any serious discussion about moving that to another chain.
So thanks for stepping in there. Cool. I think that's all the questions left with me. Still on open questions here. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to drop them now. I'll be paying attention to the chat here. We'll give it a couple of seconds. If nothing pops up, we can end the call a couple minutes early. Not seeing any typing, we can end the call here. Obviously, as usual, feel free to ask questions in any of our Discord channels. Contributors are generally around. You don't need to necessarily be on these community calls to have your questions answered. So don't feel like you need to wait. We're generally around to engage. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for the next community call, hopefully trying out the new Discord stages. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, Keaton.